Welcome to Therapeutic Perspective Podcast. Our mission is to bring you current mental health information directly relevant to your clinical practice through engaging interviews with varied specialty experts. My name is Shonda Moralis. As a licensed clinical social worker in private practice in the Northeast for over 2 decades, I know how important continuing education is, not only for professional growth and burnout prevention, but for our own personal self-care and sense of empowerment as well. Therapeutic Perspective is a continuing education provider, so stay tuned until the end of the show to learn how you can obtain NBCC continuing education credit hours for listening. We hope you enjoy the show. So welcome to Therapeutic Perspective Podcast. I am here with Sarah Dennehy and Melanie Smith from Shanthi Project. Sarah Dennehy is the Director of Programs of Shanthi Project. She is a licensed behavior specialist with a master's in special education and a certified mindfulness and yoga teacher for children and adults. Sarah oversees community programs offered in 230 public school classrooms, as well as trauma-informed mindfulness and yoga taught inside our local county juvenile justice system. Melanie Smith is Shanthi Project's senior teacher and trainer. Melanie holds many mindfulness and yoga certifications. In addition to leading trauma-informed mindfulness and yoga for Shanthi Project, Melanie has taught studio-based yoga classes, workshops, domestic and global retreats, and stand-up paddleboard yoga teacher trainings. She has a decade of experience as a family service specialist for New Jersey Department of Children and Families, specializing in trauma, child welfare, family reunification, and adoption cases. So welcome to you both. And let's dive in with who you are and tell us a little bit about the why behind your work. And I'm not sure who wants to go first.
I'll start.
Okay. Sarah?
So my why, I've been working with kids with autism, ADHD, anxiety for many years. And about 10 years ago, I started my own meditation practice. So, I was finding so many benefits from it. And when I went into work, I was thinking, how can I give this, feeling or, all the good stuff that's coming from my meditation practice. How can I teach that to the kids that I work with? So I went home and I just Googled meditation for kids, and I had no idea that you could become a kids mindfulness teacher, a kids yoga teacher. So I signed up for a kids yoga certification training program. And after I signed up, I was thinking, well, I should probably start practicing yoga. I had tried it before, and it wasn't for me. My husband was taking a class, and so he encouraged me to, take the class. And Melanie happened to be the teacher of that class. And I guess, what they say is true, that, you need to have the right teacher for it to click. And I haven't looked back. So since then, I got the certification. I ended up getting my adult yoga teacher training certification. And I started right away working with kids and, yoga and mindfulness. Then I found Shanthi Project again through Melanie. I took her out for coffee one day. I said, tell me all about Shanthi Project and how I can be a part of it. So I started teaching in the classrooms, and then about a year later became director of programs. And it's really been life-changing.
Wonderful. And so reminder for all of us that it's worth giving yoga or anything new really more than one try, because you never know. Mm-hmm. I've had so many people say I've tried to meditate or I've tried to do yoga and it's not for me. So
absolutely.
Absolutely good.
So yeah, maybe give it like 3 tries. I think that's what it took me. So.
Or 3, yes. And you, Melanie?
Yeah, so my name is Melanie Smith, and I am a 500-hour yoga teacher, trainer, mindfulness teacher, stand-up paddleboarder, nature lover. When I go to my why about teaching for Shanti and also for practicing mindfulness and using that as a form of therapy in my life, is because when I was working for the state of New Jersey, I had hit a point of total burnout. That, just the compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, burnout, like all three of those, I hit all three of those marks. And during that time, I did have a regular yoga practice, and I would get on my mat, and that was probably the best place that I felt. And it really wasn't the physical yoga poses, it was the feeling after the practice that, like, I'm in Shavasana or I'm sitting up and I'm, taking a few mindful moments before I moved on to whatever else my day held. And that was the best feeling. Just complete kind of like, for me, I can only ever speak for myself, a complete like wholeness, like, okay, I'm back in my body. I'm back to grounded reconnection. And so I at that time had connected with Denise Bears, and Denise was the founder of Shanthi Project, and kind of told her what I was doing. And I should say that I was also wanting to be a yoga teacher. Like, I wanted to teach what I was experiencing. And I did my 200-hour teacher training, and I started to teach. And then I met Denise, and we spoke a lot about my work. And she said, I can totally, bring you on, and you would be a great fit. And so I started teaching in the Northampton County Prison. We did one of a pilot program in the Phillipsburg School District with some very challenging kids. That classroom was like a big eye opener about, just going in and trying to share these practices, that it might not always go the way that you planned or had hoped. But that connection with Denise and that feeling of I want to share this always comes back to my why. And like Sarah said, and you said, it may take like 1, 2, 3 tries, but I feel like when you're, how do I want to say it? When you're in the right space, when you're open to it, that's maybe when it's going to happen. So I wanted to be able to implement this stuff within the state of New Jersey, like seeing our clients and seeing our families. You could see the history of trauma, the generational trauma, and wanting to apply that there. And I don't think when I was there with the state, we were ready for that yet. And so me just feeling frustrated, like I want to be able to do this with the people that I'm working with, but it just wasn't the time. So working more with Shanthi Project is a great way to implement these practices and to help. So yeah. I think like long why.
No, yeah, absolutely. All good. And I think, ultimately it's about, you have this felt sense of what mindfulness or meditation has done, or yoga practice, for what it feels like for each of us. And then you want other people to have that feeling as well. And it is hard to describe. It's hard to articulate. So yeah, hopefully planting seeds, and people are at some point open to it. So let's review the basics. What is trauma-informed mindfulness?
So let's start with mindfulness. The definition of mindfulness means paying attention to the present moment. And when we're in the present moment, we're more aware of how we're feeling, the thoughts we're having, the physical sensations, and that allows us to respond rather than just automatically react to what's going on inside of us and around us. So, we're better able to pause and self-regulate when we realize that we need to, when we realize we're a little dysregulated. So we practice mindfulness by focusing on the present moment. And one of the ways we might practice mindfulness is just to focus on the breath. So just, sitting still, focusing on the inhale, on the exhale. And that just sounds simple, and not really a big deal. But that can actually be traumatizing for some. Just focusing on the breath can actually be a re-traumatization for some people. So it can like intensify feelings that they might have been experiencing during a trauma or focused around a past trauma. So when we're trauma informed, or we also call it trauma sensitive, we have an understanding of trauma, and we can therefore do our best to recognize if someone is experiencing trauma and then respond to it. And we can also take precautions as we're teaching or as we're, practicing. We can take precautions with our language, our mannerisms, the strategies that we use, just basically how we teach. And, we're striving to set up as safe as we can environment for those around us. Of course, we can't be 100% prepared. We don't know everyone's traumas and what they're coming in with, but at least we can recognize a re-traumatization and be able to respond to it.
Mm-hmm. And sort of coming in, I would assuming that some children or some people in the room likely will have some trauma. So it's there. I'm sort of just kind of on the lookout for when it does show up.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to talk now about what some of those symptoms might look like, or what that might look like that maybe we don't always think about?
Yeah,
absolutely. So like the different responses that we might see, we hear about the fight or flight response. So we can kind of get used to, what that might look like for some people. So with the fight response, you might have the, like tight clenched muscles and, just a scowl and pressured speech and just like an aggressive sort of state. And it can also look like, just the punching, kicking, hitting, stomping. Flight is more of, kind of like eyes are darting around the room, fidgety, maybe stimming, like self-stimulatory behaviors. Like these kids feel trapped. And that's really what it is. That fight or flight is that you're in this hypervigilant state. You're on the lookout for danger and you're expecting danger at any time. And that could also look like a freeze response, which, we'll say is just kind of like a shutdown response. So you might see kids actually going under tables, sitting in the corner, not responding, kind of just shutting everyone out, not talking. They don't want to look at anyone. And there's also a response called the fawn response. And that's kids who are kind of like the pleasers, kids or anyone really, people pleasers, don't ever want to say no, really don't have boundaries. They apologize a lot. And, just become easily overwhelmed. So these are some of the things, just to kind of be on the lookout for. Now, having said that, someone might have just had a bad day or just might be in a bad mood or, but, especially if you're seeing these kids on a regular basis, you can kind of see patterns and maybe, certain times of day and you can start to understand maybe what might be triggering for that specific child.
So tell me more about the fawn response, because that probably is hard to distinguish between, your sort of model student that, you're kind of, as the teacher, yay, this is somebody who's into it or listening, and so what's the difference? How can you tell?
So it might be, like you said, it might be hard to kind of figure out at first, but if you see patterns where a child is doing everything they can to please somebody else and to their detriment, or, they always want to be the good kid or the nice kid, and, it's not really equal or shared, a relationship, then you start to notice that pattern. You're not going to, if upon meeting a child for the first time, realize what's going on or just assume that's what's going on. But over time, you can probably see that, they're not getting anything out of the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah.
So who is trauma-informed or trauma-sensitive mindfulness for?
Yeah, so it's for everyone. I think the way that you approach it, the languaging that you use, is vitally important. So as a therapist, as a teacher, as an educator, as a coach for a sports team, that might be a great place. Individuals who are working in juvenile treatment or in the prisons, I think it's really, if you're interacting with other individuals in a dynamic where there's a over-under power dynamic, being aware of being trauma sensitive and trauma informed is vitally important, because like we just said, you don't know how you're going to trigger people or how people are going to respond. So the more aware you are of the way that you're presenting your languaging, your vocal tones is another one. And just how you're presenting yourself. If you're domineering and coming into a situation where I know best, you're gonna start to impact quite a few people around you. So that trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive is important for anyone, I think.
Yeah. So, and I guess what I'm hearing with that is the mindfulness attitude of curiosity and sort of openness and trying to really understand, coming with my sense of, I'm curious about this. I don't know the answer to this just because there's this behavior. I'm not going to assume it's defiance or unwillingness. It could be many things, and let me just reserve judgment sort of as best I can.
Yeah, I think about like a lot of times when we would go into a classroom and you're seeing the kids twice a week for 20 minutes for 8 weeks. And you may have kids who are giving off those different responses. You may have kids who are super into it. But over time, you start to realize, like, not every child appreciates quiet. Quiet to them may signal danger or that something is looming around the corner. So a quiet classroom where no one's making a sound, our eyes are closed, and you're trying to sit and breathe, that may be, even for me, that sounds glorious. But for a child who is in a home where that signals danger, that re-traumatization is happening right then and there. So to be aware of that is very important in those subtleties. I think the trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive is very subtle in how we work with it.
So what are some possible effects of trauma, especially these symptoms and behaviors that are often overlooked? We talked about some of these. Are there any more? Obviously there probably are a whole laundry list of effects and symptoms that will show up with trauma. Anything else?
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say they show up differently for everyone. And we might see, we'll see evidence of a child who's been triggered in their response, fight, flight, or freeze, or whatever it is, like we just discussed. But for example, think about ADHD and like the symptoms that you might see in a child who's been diagnosed with ADHD. They're fidgety, they're kind of looking around the room, they're having a really hard time sitting still or even just sitting. And, we might just give them a fidget toy and, put them on a point system and, they'll have an IEP or something like that. And not that we aren't, supporting that child, but we may not be looking at the correct, the root of the issue. So a lot of times kids will be misdiagnosed or just labeled as a bad kid with behavioral issues. But this is due to circumstances beyond their control, like that are rooted in their childhood trauma. So they are trying to survive, because all of those fight, flight, freeze, those are survival modes. That's a response. Our brain is responding and putting us into survival mode. And when just a quick brain lesson, when the amygdala is activated and puts us in that fight or flight, the prefrontal cortex kind of goes offline. And that's where we do our thinking and our reasoning. So if that's not working, then I'm not able to sit and learn. I'm not able to retain information. I'm not able to do what is expected of me in the classroom. So, and I'm going to get in trouble for that, which, is kind of crazy because I'm just trying to survive.
Yeah. And I was going to say, even the hippocampus, kind of, we relate that to the kids as that's the library of your brain. And when that amygdala is firing, that prefrontal cortex has gone offline, it's harder to access that information that's in your hippocampus, your memories.
Mm-hmm.
You think about like your times tables and, adding and subtracting and how kids are learning that, just vocab words, those things become harder to access when they're in trauma response or in survival mode.
Yeah. So when a teacher or a parent or anyone is saying, we just talked about that, or the same thing happened yesterday. How are you not learning? It's because, I'm incapable of really retaining that or remembering that or thinking through that logically, because I'm in survival mode. So those impulsive behaviors happen, it looks impulsive to us, but again, it's a response.
Mm-hmm.
And then just how you were saying that, like you think about, and the no fault of the teacher, the educator, the parent, right? But just with that context, there comes shame and blame and guilt. And then, that kind of layers the cake on of how a child may already be just trying to survive day in and day out, and going to school may become very tedious, or going home or doing an activity may become twice as hard. Mm-hmm. And so if you have kids who are doing activities and they're pushing back on, I don't want to go today, I think that's worthy of a conversation also. Well, what about it? Why not?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of like high functioning anxiety, or like, kids who are, when you were talking about fawn, like the striving, I've got to be the top this and the top that, how come?
Right.
Where is that coming from?
Right. That's what I was thinking too, talking about, with the brain, how it mimics. It's the same situation with mental health, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things, right? So it's all of that. It can look trauma. It can look like trauma. It could be anxiety, and it's exhausting to be in survival mode too, right? So like to your point, Melanie, it's exhausting, and then there's nothing left, at the end of the school day or part of the school day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Which comes back to, as adults, when we know, the more that we can be mindful and have this own practice that we can come to, because it is not easy for teachers or therapists or any of us working with kids who are exhibiting these behaviors. And if we come and we're exhausted and we're stressed out and we have no capacity left, then we're barking, and then we're perpetuating this. And so, it's up to us too to try to.
Yeah, that co-regulation piece of it as well. Like, you're mirroring what you get back. So in those moments where we're feeling max capacity as adults, and through mindfulness, like learning, okay, I need to take a step back. And I need to put that pause. And then I can start to share that outwardly with others around me.
Yeah. So can we talk about that a little bit? Co-regulation, and maybe specifically for mental health professionals who are listening. It could be also parents. It applies to any of us. But what would you recommend when it comes to how do we co-regulate? What are some simple tools or steps we can take to do that if we are feeling flooded or even just a little bit tweaked, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, so just that's where the mindfulness practice comes in. We practice mindfulness when we're feeling calm and regulated, and in the hopes that when we are feeling a little triggered or dysregulated, we can draw on our experience and bring ourselves into a calmer state. So recognizing that you've been triggered, super important. We might find ourselves yelling or, saying something we wished we hadn't. And then we were feeling shame and guilt. And why did I behave that way? So just sort of understanding patterns of when you're interacting with kids, what upsets you, what kinds of things sort of create dysregulation for you, understanding those patterns, knowing what your triggers are, and then sort of having a plan. Okay, so I know usually about this time of day, kids are starting to get a little, tired and whiny, and then I can feel it in myself as well. So at that point, maybe, take a few breaths, maybe pause before, to help myself to be able to pause before, just automatically reacting. And, just taking a few breaths. What do I want to see out of, the child I'm working with or the child that I'm living with right now? What kind of behaviors, and then model those behaviors, as Melanie was saying. So, just if a kid is kind of dysregulated, you're not going to say to them, okay, go take some breaths or just calm down and relax, and you're going to do it. So you just start to take some slow breaths, recognize the thoughts that are going through your head. Where am I holding tension right now? Relax your shoulders, relax your jaw. Breathe, or just, some type of a strategy that helps you feel more regulated. And then as you start to feel calmer and better, then, the kids around you are going to respond to that. That's the co-regulation piece. So, without words and without explicit instructions that they're not going to listen to anyway, because they're just not in the headspace to receive it, you're able to, get them to a place where maybe you can just pause and, then you can model a few breaths that you've taken with them, snake breath or bunny breath or, something like that. Or some other strategies, that you use to connect, and get them to a space where they're a little more regulated, and then you can talk through anything that you need to.
Yeah, and for us at Shanthi Project, whenever we're starting a program with adults or training or with our in-house staff, we always start with a practice. And you experienced that during the trauma training, that's how we like to begin. That's how we begin any presentation out in the public, is that we're going to start with this experiential practice. Because one, however it took me to get here or to get there, maybe I need a moment to ground and to connect myself before I start to try and engage and present material. So if I'm grounded and connected and then I'm ready. Like my whole headspace is ready. My physical body is ready. I'm showing up in full present focus mindset. And so that, like, for adults, is a great way to co-regulate with a larger audience, or just one-on-one. If you're doing a therapy session, like, can you start out with, okay, we're going to scan the body really quickly, even just, breathe in, breathe out, like that visceral feeling of going from tension to release. Yeah. Some people they're disassociated from their body. So that, even just like, this is how you might be living 99% of the time. Can we get you to, even just a little bit?
Right. Yeah. So starting a therapy session like that. And then, so to your point, in a therapy session, let's say I'm with a child who is becoming flooded, triggered. Are you saying I should just pause and kind of regulate? That's that co-regulation. Or do I say I'm going, like, I know you said not to use the words, but would I say I'm going to take a few breaths? I'm feeling a little.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, that's modeling. You can do it either way. Okay. You can say, you know what, I'm feeling a little tense right now, or I'm feeling frustrated. So, and I can tell because my heart's beating a little bit faster. My shoulders are tight. So, and I keep thinking about, whatever. So I'm just going to take a few breaths, relax my shoulders. So you're modeling for them. And who, depending on the state they're in, they might be taking in some of that. And then at the same time, you are regulating yourself, you are calming yourself. So it's kind of twofold. It's the modeling and it's the actual, co-regulation piece.
Right.
Yeah, you're giving yourself the space to reconnect your nervous system and your thoughts and getting yourself back to homeostasis, and then proceeding forward.
And I think it's helpful to also say afterwards, okay, you know what? I'm feeling a little bit better now. My body's feeling a little more relaxed. My heartbeat slowed down a little. My breathing is a little bit regular, and that was because, I noticed what was going on, and, I took some breaths and scanned my body or relaxed, whatever it is you did. So, they see it from start to finish. And I think that can be super helpful. And I think it's really helpful for kids to see, oh, there's an adult who's frustrated and having these feelings and feeling that way. So adults feel this way too. I think it's really helpful for kids to understand what's happening physiologically and know that this is normal and can happen to anybody. And it does happen to everybody. So it's not that I'm bad or there's something wrong with me. I'm just having the response that my body's supposed to have.
Right. And that we have that ability to do something about it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it makes you as the teacher, the therapist, the person who's guiding that moment seem more human, maybe, to that other person, right? Like you may be larger than life to, your client. And then that brings you more into that humanistic, like, oh, wait, they have problems too. Like, and I think that's the thing, like mindfulness isn't unicorns and rainbows. It does take work. And so just even those co-regulation modeling moments are planting seeds, and maybe they pick up 1 or 2 seconds of that and then noticing, like, I have a private mindfulness client, and I asked her today, like, are you noticing yourself, like when you're being more mindful, or when you're noticing your body in a particular way, in these scenarios where you're really stressed out? And she said, yeah, small bites. Small bites. So it does, it's like learning a language, lifting weights, learning a new skill. Like it does take a little bit of time. So even for us, there are moments where I'm like, oh, my mindfulness just went totally out the window there, but that's part of the piece of awareness that, okay, in hindsight, I saw it, and maybe next time I'll be able to respond better. And by better, I mean, I'm not judging myself. I'm just aware that I handled that not as well as I wanted to. So if I have to revisit it, hopefully that emotional intelligence shows back up.
Right.
Yeah. And planting seeds, that's important to remember, because just because we might work with kids and teach them these strategies, it's not like, okay, we've been doing this for a couple months now you're out on your own. Kids, their prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed till they're 25. Like they're still going to need support. The support might not be as intense as it was before. It might just be some prompting and some, modeling, or just doing it with them. But it's not like we should expect them to just, okay, now you've got all these strategies, so why aren't you using them? You should be using them. It shouldn't, it should never be like that.
Right. Like growth for the rest of our lives, hopefully.
Right.
Yes, right. Like with everything. Great. So what are ACEs?
So ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. So that is any trauma that a child might have experienced. It's a trauma that could potentially lead to chronic illness or behavioral issues. And that might look like experiencing abuse or neglect or violence, or witnessing violence, whether it's in the home or in the community. It can be anything that sort of creates an unstable environment for the child, like having a family member with a mental health issue or a substance abuse issue. And it could be a one-time experience, like a car accident is a traumatic experience, or it could be something that's experienced sort of chronically, like over time on a daily basis, or, a fairly regular basis. And you can actually find out your ACEs score. There's a quiz. It's I think it's still 10. It's sort of 10 criteria or questions, and you can. I think if you go to the CDC website, you can take the quiz, and it's interesting to learn your own ACEs score. But it should also know that I think they say if you have a score of 4 or more, then you're at higher risk for behavioral issues or chronic illness, early death. But it's important to know that that's not a definite. If you have some type of support as a child, some stable person, with you or guiding you or supporting you, then, there's a chance that you're not going to experience, chronic illness or have behavioral issues. And what's traumatic for me may not be traumatic for you. We all experience trauma a little bit differently and internalize it a little bit differently. So there's no absolutes when it comes to ACEs. And also important to know, and I don't know if they're going to be updating the criteria, but they don't take into consideration things like poverty or racism, which is a huge impact. And I think they're going to have to.
Yeah, I was thinking that there's nothing about homelessness.
Yeah.
Or food insecurity, which we've seen totally rise, especially in this area as well. So,
right, absolutely. Yeah. And so we'll put that, we'll link that in the show notes too, to take that quiz, but also it brings up the idea of resilience, which is part of what mindfulness, what you're trying to teach is these tools for resilience to counter some of these ACEs. So can you talk a little bit about the school to prison pipeline?
Yeah. So policies and procedures that are in place, like that lead to students getting sort of pushed out of classrooms and into the juvenile or criminal justice system. I mean, that's basically what it is. And a disproportionate number of Black kids get suspended from school and, experience other school disciplinary action compared with white kids. So there's actually, it's very disturbing, more than a few instances. And, now there's video of everything. So of kids as young as 5 years old, 5, 6, 7-year-olds getting arrested for behaviors in classrooms. Yeah. Again, we just talked about, the trauma responses and, that child, that's an example of the school to prison pipeline. At 5 years old, you're already labeled and, getting disciplined. And
you have a record.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's the zero tolerance policies in place in schools, the black and brown situations where BIPOC students are, it's overly critical discipline towards them, and truancy, there's a harsher, at times harsher truancy policies that impact okay, now you haven't been showing up for school, you have a truancy officer, the officer is contacting you, coming to your house, and again, it just adds to what's already happening. If everyone in the home is struggling, and you're not able to make it to school, even if you're in a situation where kids are caregivers, right? And they're getting younger siblings off to school, and they're late to school, that zero policy in place for them, it doesn't bode well at all. And so, and then, Sarah can speak to this a little bit more with the juvenile treatment, but just, once you're in the system, it's very hard to get out of that situation in the juvenile treatment centers.
Yeah, so. I've seen kids. I was, teaching for 2-3 years, and with the same kids, there's not much turnaround. And I don't want to speak too much about it because I'm not sure exactly, what the criteria are. But yeah, and that's kind of how Shanthi Project got started, at least our in-class mindfulness program, because our founder, Denise, was teaching yoga and mindfulness at the Juvenile Justice Center, and, got to know these kids. And the question then becomes not like, what did you do to get in here, but what happened to you that led you to this place? And then she started reading up on the school to prison pipeline, and, all right, so what do we do? Now that we have this information, what do we do? And that's how our in-class mindfulness program got started.
And that goes back to, what does it mean to be trauma sensitive, trauma informed? You're asking the question, what happened? Not, why are you acting like this?
What's your problem?
Exactly.
But actually, what happened? Taking that approach.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are some trauma-sensitive ways we can ask children that we work with, ask them questions or have these conversations?
Yeah, I think it is just having a conversation. Obviously, if a child is, unconsolable, you're not going to have a conversation at that time. You're going to wait for that wave of emotion to pass. But if there is able to be a conversation, I think speaking in a way of, maybe not asking directly what happened to you, but, I'm here to listen, tell me how you're feeling if you can put it into words, or, how does it feel in your body? I've witnessed some, investigations and times where a child's really had to disclose difficult information and to an adult, and the techniques that are used by prosecutors and that kind of investigatory conversation with a child, they're looking for something, because they know that there might be something there. But if you're in a therapy session or I'm in a classroom, just, hey, how's it going? I feel like I do really good with the middle school kids, because I'm like, hey, how are you guys? What's happening? And we can just start to wrap like that together. And they'll be like, well, this happened, and, but I'm feeling better. And okay. And so the next time I come, it's rapport building. Also, like, they feel safe with me, and I do care. Like, I want to hear, what's happening. And I do a lot of after school programs. And so that's our time, like at the end of the day, where we're doing mindfulness. We're doing that formal practice of mindfulness, but then we're doing other things. And it's always starting out with a question, taking a breath in, taking a breath out. We'll do it with the Hoberman sphere. And okay, tell me, and I'll come up with a new question that day. Like, what's the most recent thing you've watched? Was it good? Did you like it? And then they're able to kind of form a dialogue, and the other kids are commenting around it. But we have a boundary of, if you don't like something, notice when you want to make a comment about it. And can you notice that if I just wait, I don't have to say that comment, because not everyone feels the same way about certain things. So we kind of like, when I do that as a group, we set a boundary right away. And then we start to go into that kind of like, all right, tell me more. Like, how many siblings do you have? Who lives in your home? And I think that's conversational wise, like a great way to like a child to get to know you. You start to know the child. And then from there, there's that rapport building. And you can eventually get to the, what happened.
Yeah, I like that. And I think that could work well too, just one-on-one in a therapy office of, it's almost like that invitation of, hey, if you notice something happening in your body, just pause and notice it. And then is that something you want to say or not? And so I guess that teaching them that the pause, right? And how powerful that can be.
Yeah.
Right.
That awareness of, I feel this way. I might not be able to articulate it so clearly, but I feel a particular way about a particular thing viscerally, this is happening in my physical body. You know, that as a kid, I can't think any time that I really noticed that.
Right.
You
We
know?
didn't. Right. And a lot of adults, I'm sure we know, work with too, are just completely disconnected from, the physicality of it.
Yeah.
So the foundation here is you're creating this safe space, and you're also teaching them about self-awareness. Those are two really important key. And at the same time, just through questions, how was your day? What show do you like? You're getting to know them and just how they have conversations. You know, what's the best way to talk to them? So you're kind of getting to know that as you're building this foundation. And then, the more difficult topics, it's easier for them to talk about it. They feel validated, they feel listened to, and, they feel safe answering these questions. And you also get to know a little bit more about them and how, maybe this kid does better if he's bouncing on a ball. Maybe he can, it's easier for him to talk if he's, walking around the room and not even looking at me. I can get more out of them. So you're learning about them, while you're building this foundation.
Yeah. And to me, it just keeps coming back to our work as the adults, as the providers, or whatever our role is, that the more embodied we can be with patience and tolerance and mindfulness and non-judgmental attitude, we know the other person feels that. And so, yeah. Okay. So kind of a big question, how does mindfulness help treat trauma? I don't know where you want to go with that, and I'll throw that back out to the two of you.
Yeah. I'll jump in real quick. I think in the onset of it, if you're disassociated with your body, I think it can help you come back into your body in a way that over time, it can be a nice slow process. It doesn't need to be a fast process at all, because we don't know what that trauma was. I think about, like, I work for Shanthi with Turning Point of the Lehigh Valley, and
Just domestic violence.
Yeah, and I work with their staff doing mindfulness drop-ins, and I think about them and the feedback that they give me as far as like what works for them and what doesn't work, especially if there's something in their history that this particular, like, just sitting and breathing, the breath, like Sarah said earlier, could be very traumatizing, and some people have expressed that. So figuring out, other ways to drop into the body. Maybe it's just feeling your 2 feet on the ground, or feeling your sit bones in the chair, or even just feeling your shoulder blades, these gentle touch points of your body with the chair, and just sitting upright. So you're not laying down, the lights aren't dark, it's a safe space. But just starting with that reassociation with the body. We want to go from there.
Well, I was just going to say, and just letting the client, or, whoever you're working with, know that they're in control of the situation. They can put the brakes on at any time, and, you'll respect that. We want to work within the window of tolerance. Are you familiar with that?
Oh, tell us.
Yeah, so the window of tolerance is, it's like that space between hypo and hyper arousal. It's like the optimum space for that person. And depending on the day, I mean, that window could be really tiny, or it could be wider, but just helping the person understand their own window, and, when it is that time that they need to say, put the brakes on, or just take a moment, or, so again, building those foundational pieces, knowing what strategies work best for that person, and, letting them know that they have control, and how important it is to have that self-awareness, and just to, like you were saying, Melanie, just to be aware of what's going on in them, be able to come back there.
Yeah.
And I like that, the window of tolerance. And I think, therapeutically and in an office one-on-one could be really helpful to articulate that. This is, and how can the client get clear on, this is kind of my low level, the hypo is where, this is my window, this is what it feels like, the high and the low. And then there's that growth edge too, right? Of kind of, how do I bring it back into that window if I'm feeling, so I think we can all, probably it's easy to understand what hyper arousal is going to look like. Then the hypo, is that what you're talking about? More of the sort of hiding, shutting down.
Yeah,
Okay.
that flat
Yeah.
affect.
Dissociating.
mode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I think through inviting language, giving choice. So putting the ball into the other person's court. Like, I'm just going to give you these guidelines, but you can choose where you want to take it and how far, or, with the window of tolerance, how far or how short, you want to take it. And so, starting off a session by, if we're doing formal mindfulness, normally, I hear a lot of, like, on the apps, they'll say, okay, close your eyes. And, if you're in a group setting, it may not feel safe to close your eyes. And it may, like, if we're on a session in Zoom, it may not feel comfortable to close your eyes. So that inviting language of, you have the option to close your eyes or take a soft gaze down, and just using that as you go. You take 3 rounds of breath. There's no right or wrong way to breathe. There's no judgment there. And so I think that creates the space for a person to be curious, at least for a few seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So what are some other therapeutic applications, talking about if the breath feels too intense? Can you give, a handful of other ways that kids especially, but also adults maybe can drop into some mindfulness awareness?
Focusing on sound. So we'll bring the chime in, and just, I'm going to tap the chime, see if you can follow the sound to the end. When it disappears for you, raise your hand. There's no right or wrong there, right? My particular favorite is moving the body. Maybe yoga is not your thing, but maybe dancing is your thing. Maybe bar is your thing. If you're an adult, maybe, a kid running, that's their thing. Or, getting them into something physical where, you can move that stuff, that emotion, that build up out of your nervous system, out of your body. And, if you think about it, like, you're doing a very strenuous thing, and then your body feels fatigued and your mind feels quiet afterwards, you've expelled all that gunk inside of you. So, just shaking, singing, in your car, like, windows down, it's a nice spring day, turn the radio up and sing, and, parents sing with your kids in the car. Yeah.
And that's actually literally calming you down. That activates the vagus nerve, which kicks in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is, getting you back to that homeostasis. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mindful walking.
I think there are misconceptions that with mindfulness, it's just sitting in a quiet room and meditating and sort of emptying your mind. And you can meditate as a mindfulness practice, but it can be so much more dynamic than that.
Yeah, even just talking, like having a friend who's a supportive friend, someone who's, if things are going on in your life and it's a person that you feel like you can be open and share, and the conversation's not going to spiral into darkness. That kind of supportive friend conversation can feel really good. Laughing. I love to make jokes and make people laugh. It makes us all feel good. The 5 sense check, just checking in with all 5 of your senses. I mean, that's something you can do and almost no one will know that you're doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so these movements, so whether it's, getting some physical activity, intense physical activity, walking, anything, do you recommend pausing, kind of like almost a mountain pose, just standing up and noticing afterwards, or not necessarily, or is that all like window of tolerance stuff?
No, I think you can start off. It's a good way to start off. Just noticing how you feel, building that self-awareness. Right now, it's really hard for me to just sit still right now. Anyone else noticing that, and then kind of a conversation, what does that feel like? And so we're normalizing. It's okay to feel like you don't have to, just, sit still and be perfect. And then getting up and moving, shaking it out or whatever it is that you do. And then right afterwards, noticing, okay, like my heart's beating faster and, my body feels full of energy now. And yeah, so really noticing what's going on. I mean, you don't have to do that, but I think it's a great way to build self-awareness.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions after a mindfulness, like a formal mindfulness practice is over, where we've gone through the breath, we've gone through the body scan, and people will say, I feel so tired now. Or I feel tired, but I feel alert. And, that's a great observation of yourself and the duality of being able to feel those two things at once. That, yeah, my brain feels alert, but like physically I feel, tired. But is it the difference between tired, or are you just really relaxed and you haven't been really relaxed in a while in your body? So I think getting that feedback at the end from yourself is valuable.
So when it comes to therapists introducing some mindfulness to working with kids or adults for that matter, but let's say maybe with kids, how might they introduce it in a way that they get some buy-in to try it out?
I think if you want to introduce it, you should be doing it yourself. Like, you should be able to embody what you're wanting to share. Because kids can see right through us also. So I think, in the onset, like if you're brand new to mindfulness, as a therapist or as an educator, start small for yourself, start these practices, see what's working for you, see what lands for you, expand out. And then once you feel like you're able to convey that, then give it a try. And in that, just starts small, right? Like, for the kids in the schools, like we start out with like, the chime, just listening. And then we just try and take a mindful minute and just see in that minute, what happens.
And a mindful minute means what exactly?
Go ahead.
So in a mindful minute, you're, again, we're coming back to giving them choices as how to spend that minute. And you can just focus on your breath. We call it anchors. Your anchor can be your breath. It can be feeling your feet on the floor, or just noticing what's happening with your feet. It can be listening to just the sounds in the room that you're in, and maybe, expanding to outside the room. So give them an anchor and say, just, do your best to just focus on that one thing. We're going to, for 1 minute. And we might use a sand timer. So that's another thing. They can just, look at, their anchor can just be looking at the sand running through the timer. So do your best to focus on that one thing. Your mind is going to wander because you're a human. And when it does, just come back to that anchor. You might do that 17 times. You might do it 3 times. It really doesn't matter. And then we just sit. And if there are some noises or fidgeting, that's okay. We're not looking for perfection. And then when that minute is up, I'll just ask, okay, what did you notice? Or how did that feel? How do you feel right now? And we can get usually some really good answers, some really thoughtful answers. And that's where you might hear something like, well, I realize, I feel really tired, but I'm also in a really good mood. Or, they might just want to share all the things that they heard because they were focusing on listening. But what it comes down to is we're just training the brain to focus a little bit better and to be in the present moment.
Okay. So any other therapeutic applications or some practical tools for kids that you would recommend?
Well, depending on the age, we'll use different, to get kids practicing breathing, we'll come up with fun breaths. Like I mentioned, bunny breath, and, there's hot chocolate breath, and there's lion breath, pretty much anything is a breath. And,
fingered breathing.
Yeah. Getting the kids want to, they'll make up their own breaths. And what that is doing is just getting them excited about breathing. But I think it's really, really important to teach them about their brains and what exactly is happening. When I feel overwhelmed, this is what's happening in my brain, and I have the power to, get that back under control. It doesn't mean the feeling is going to vanish. It just means that I'm better equipped now to respond to it rather than, react and maybe get in trouble or hurt somebody and it's also really important to teach kids about their feelings. And, as little as 3-4 years old, we're just talking about the real basic feelings, just happy, sad, surprised, scared, angry, and, what those feelings might look like, what our body's doing when we're having those feelings. And then, as the kids get older, we can have more conversations about, different kinds of feelings and where they come from. But really important for kids to understand that, to name the feeling that they're experiencing, that Dan Siegel, name it to tame it, and take a breath. You're just creating space for mindfulness to come in and you got this. So just empowering kids, super important.
That's the word I was going to use, and I love it. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the empowering, right? Like if we're in trauma response, we feel very disempowered. So how do we put the ball back into their court so that they feel like they can stand up and say, okay, I feel like this today. And the recognition, like I think for kids, is that you can have multiple feelings at once, and that can be really confusing. And neither is better than the other or good or bad. So, yeah, I think, the naming it to tame it is so valuable.
Yeah, that's an important point, that just because you're angry doesn't mean you are bad.
Yep.
That feeling might be unpleasant, but it's not a reflection on who you are. I mean, so many times I'll ask kids, is it okay to be angry? And they say, no, it isn't. And so that's the lesson we have to teach them. No matter what feeling you're feeling, that's just a feeling that's, it's not who you are. It's just a feeling that you're having, and it's temporary, and it's okay. And we all feel that way. Right. Same with your thoughts.
Yep. Yeah. The validation of feelings also, I think is, your feeling is valid, and I'm not going to try and take that away from you.
Right. And how empowering to allow them to learn how to tolerate their emotions too, right? I mean, that is because as so many adults are just terrified of feeling what they are feeling, as we know. And so to teach that to kids is just amazing. So
yeah. And another misconception about mindfulness is that we need to be happy all the time.
Yes.
But the reality is, if you're angry, feel it. Where do you feel it? I feel it. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in, my hands or my jaw. And just that stepping back away from it, and with that curiosity of this is what it feels like, right there you're creating space, and you're just being mindful of that feeling, and it gets a little less intense. And with that self-awareness, you start to understand that it's everything is temporary. The thoughts, the feelings, the good and the bad, they come and go.
And within that then comes the resilience piece of it. That, if I felt this feeling, and if I just sat with it for a moment, it feels very strong. It feels like a gigantic wave right now, but eventually it's going to slowly dissipate. And then it's not there anymore. And then I can move on to the next thing. I mean, you're just learning emotional resilience right there. No one's forcing you to do that. You're doing that on your own.
Right.
And that goes back to the empowerment piece of things.
Yes. Which brings us back to planting seeds and, that these tools for the rest of their lives, which is amazing. So thank you both so much for being here. And we will post a lot of these resources in the show notes. I mean, I think also we need to really be clear, and I'll put some in there about therapists who how they can get started with their own practice, like you mentioned, that's so important, and then how they can layer on bringing it into their offices and as mental health professionals. So how can listeners find more about Shanthi Project?
Yeah, so you can go to shantiproject.org. Shanthi Project has a great resource library. We have a YouTube page. We have a SoundCloud with recorded formal mindfulness practices. Some of them are 5 minutes, some of them are 20 minutes. We have an entire curriculum. Do you want to speak about the curriculum that's online?
Yeah, we actually have a couple series. One is, what is it called? Well, we have a Mindfulness for Families.
Yep.
And it's a series of videos, different guided. There's a movement. I think, Melanie, you
There's
teach
a bunch
some
of
yoga.
movement.
There's just guided meditations, things you can do as a family, things parents can do with their kids. And then we have a series that was created right after the pandemic began and quarantine, schools shut down. And it's just different. It can be for teachers or parents, for anyone really. I had a friend who's a therapist who used it with a client. And it's just a series of, I think, 6 short mindfulness videos. There's a movement component that goes along with each of them, and there's also some of them have a little like mindful craft that you can do. So that fantastic resource.
And I want to note that some of the videos are in Spanish.
Yes,
Nice.
in the Mindfulness for Families.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thanks,
Thank
Shonda.
you.
If you listen to the podcast and you would like to obtain continuing education credit hours from NBCC, please check out our website at therapeuticperspective.com. You will first need to click on the show that you just listened to, then the Take This Course button. From there, you will complete the payment process and attest that you listened to the show in its entirety. After the payment is processed, you will take a 10-question quiz, followed by an evaluation so that we can better serve you. After these steps are complete, you will be given your certificate, which can be printed or stored on your therapeuticperspective.com account. If you need any help or support in the process, please email us at therapeuticperspectivepodcast@gmail.com.